Well, COP27 is the 27th conference that will see countries committed to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change gather together to tackle pressing sustainability and climate change issues. Now, a big talking point at this year's conference is how to avert a climate disaster without compromising economic growth and development in Africa. Well, here to explain what COP27 is and why you and I should care about it is Professor Imraan Valodia, who is the Vice Chancellor for Climate, Sustainability and Inequality at Wits University. Professor, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us on our platform this morning. I do want to start with that question. You know, what is COP27, well, the climate change conference as a whole? We know that the first summit was held in 1992, and since then we've had 27 iterations of this. But what exactly happens at these gatherings?
So it's really kind of organized through the UN system, and it's the it's an annual meeting where all of the countries that have signed up to the agreement come to kind of really negotiate how it is we're going to deal with the climate change issue.
Right, so as a sort of key decision-making forum, which is what you described for us, when it comes to climate change and climate-related matters, I mean, I know that a number of treaties have been adopted over the years. The conversation now is, you know, with the sort of climate disaster dangers we face today, how helpful have those treaties been over the years? How effectual have they been over the last couple of years?
So they've been quite effective at kind of raising the importance of us dealing with the climate change issue. But unfortunately, I think if we look back on all of them, and if we look back on the key three treaties that have been signed kind of along the way, we haven't managed really to cut our emissions to the extent that we would like. And kind of as things now stand, the best that we can do is to ensure that temperatures don't rise above 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to what they were compared to what they were pre-industrialization. So really, what that means is we've kind of allowed the situation to get out of hand. We still have the opportunity to make sure that we can manage this, but it's going to require a fair amount of change, and a fairly substantial transformation of the way the economy operates.
Now, there's been somewhat of a change, or a shift rather, in the discourse around climate change and the sort of different responsibilities for action that lie on developed countries and developing countries. We noted that, you know, one of the big talking points this year is around averting climate disaster without compromising economic growth for developing countries and continents such as Africa. So where is that fine line right now? Where does it lie? Are we talking about the West just solely funding a lot of these just energy transition programs that we're seeing across the African continent? Or is it a far more nuanced approach? And what responsibilities really lie for developing countries, and what kind of input can they have in this overall conversation?
Well, there's kind of really a few issues behind that. So the first is that kind of really the developed countries have industrialized and got to be developed countries based on kind of exploiting fossil fuels much more than we should have, and that has created the kind of problems of climate change. So there's two aspects to this. The first is that arising out of that action, developing countries now can't grow in the same way. So the first part of that is that it's kind of blocked off the routes for kind of developing countries to grow. The second aspect is that the countries that are having to deal mostly with the effects of climate change are the developing world. So the things like floods, damage to agriculture, the kind of impact of rising temperatures are being felt disproportionately by the developing world. So there's both of those parts of the problem have to be dealt with, and one of the ways to deal with it is through financing of the transition kind of in the developing world, to enable countries in the developing world to grow, but on a pathway that is not based on exploiting fossil fuels. And I think that's the key issue that we have to deal with.
But Prof, when we look at 2015 and the Paris Agreement, a major criticism of what happened there is that a lot of the countries that were a part of that agreement, it was non-binding for a number of them. And that's an issue, especially once we start tackling issues around funding of just transitional programs. When you've got agreements that aren't binding, the commitments, can't necessarily be, enforced in any kind of way. Isn't that a weakness that we should probably tackle head on and ensure that coming out of COP27, for instance, isn't something that is a problem when we think long term?
Yeah, absolutely, you're right. So the kind of the key problem in the way that this whole thing operates is that countries make kind of offers both on kind of how they're going to reduce their emissions, but also in terms of how the financing of this whole thing should kind of occur. And those kind of offers and agreements are not really binding. So I think what we would want out of COP27 is a much more substantial kind of increase in the amounts of the funding, but for a mechanism to deal much more seriously with the fact that we can hold countries accountable for the agreements that they make.
And to bring the issue back home, Professor, we've been talking a lot around what COP27 is, its importance, but why should it matter to, South Africans? Why we should be paying attention to what's coming out of this upcoming conference? What do you say to people who don't really understand why there's so much attention around this particular gathering? When we talk about droughts and famine and how climate change has affected Africa as a continent, we often are talking about the Horn of Africa, East Africa, because that's where a lot of the devastation is happening currently. We don't always associate climate change to sort of detrimental things that are happening here at home. So talk to us about that, and how even something such as climate change affects issues around inequality, something that is a serious issue for South Africa.
Yeah, so I think for kind of South Africa, this whole issue is a lot more important. Firstly, our emissions are a lot higher than for countries that are at the same level of economic development as we are. So really, what that means is the transition from fossil fuel-based energy to other types of energy is much more critical for us than it is for everyone else. I think the second part of it is that our industrialization and the nature of our economy is that we're extremely exposed to fossil fuels. So the transition that we're going to have to make and that we are making is really, really complex. We don't have much time to do it. The kind of price that we're going to kind of have to pay is quite high, and I think that there are all sorts of kind of economic and social issues around kind of reductions in jobs in some parts of the economy, likely increases in jobs in other parts of the economy. Kind of dealing with that transition and thinking about how we do the benefits and the costs, and how we compensate those who are going to lose, I think are extremely important challenges for us over the next few years.
All right. Well, Professor, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for coming onto our platform this morning.